Good evening, everyone. Time for another silver update. This is a daily chart provided by netdania.com. There are a number of trend lines drawn here. The major trend line, of course, going back from QE2, and you can see we're approaching that. I've got some downward sloping trend lines, the main one, the secondary one, and the tertiary one. And we put in a nice little spike here. I'm not convinced this is a bottom. I would put the volume information in, but for some reason the volume information is missing. So you can see from the line that we've drawn here, the support line, that we have not quite touched the low that we made back in the September smackdown. So my initial guess is going to be that we will probably test and penetrate this low. The next support line is going to be at exactly 25, and of course I've drawn it before many times. The support line is going to be around 21 to 22. So those are the support lines we're looking at. You want to stack physical silver as the price is falling, because we probably will see an explosive move to the upside when this thing finally reverses. This bottom spike we have here is actually a fairly significant spike. You can see we touched about 20, almost 26 flat. We're back to 27.55, so that's a $1.50 bounce. But I have never really, in all of my technical trading, I've never really seen a double bottom spike like this. So I expect it to go lower and probably create a very large spike that will then accelerate violently to the upside, something like that. So that's my expectation. Of course, no one can call the bottom, no one can call the top. If any of us could, we'd obviously be billionaires. So that's the chart as it stands. I wanted to take you over to the Silver Users Association. Now, this was a site that I happened to hit upon when I was looking for the Silver Institute. This is a very interesting organization, and a lot of things really raise a lot of red flags. So we want to examine the Silver Users Association. Now, if you remember on my Spark video, and I'll link that, I proposed that the silver producers form a kind of a cartel. What's interesting about this is that the silver users have actually already formed a cartel. So we'll read their explanation here. The Silver Users Association is a non-profit organization that was established in 1947. That's a very interesting date, because that date roughly coincides with the beginning of the electronic explosion of silver use, to represent the interests of companies that make, sell, and distribute products and services in which silver is an essential component. So this is the key. You're going to have to keep this in mind. Keep this in mind when you look at all the other links on this page, that this is a cartel of the users of silver. So the main thing you're going to have to keep in mind is that this cartel is interested in the lowest price of silver possible. And we'll see that when we look at their position on the SLV, which they opposed. Ultimately, they didn't win that. The association's members employ more than 200,000 workers and process 80% of all silver used in the United States. Now, that seems like an amazing figure, but you have to remember that most of the silver is not used in the United States because most of the manufacturing occurs in China. Members include representatives from photographic, electronic, silverware, mirror and jewelry industries, producers of semi-fabricated and industrial products, and trading and service organizations responding to member needs. So that's the welcome. Now we want to look at the about the SUA, and we pretty much looked at that. So we want to look at the public policy. In other words, what do they believe in? What is their position? And this is where it gets a little bit interesting. At the Silver Users Association, we recognize that the ability to know what is happening in Washington or in your state legislature is critical to our industry. What do they mean by that? Are they hinting at the fact that they are interested in price controls? Why is it that what's happening in Washington is critical to their industry? And it gets a lot stranger, so we'll keep reading. With this knowledge, we are able to accomplish one of our most important tasks, to lobby and promote SUA's agenda on Capitol Hill and the state legislatures around the country. Building relationships with key decision makers and their staff is essential to making sure the SUA's goals and priorities are addressed. What's their goals and priorities? SUA works every day to develop new access areas that can be utilized by our members. We build trust with those that make decisions that will affect our members. Please take a moment to review some of the SUA's recent policy positions. And they go into issues to watch. You get some really interesting stuff here, stuff that makes you scratch your head and say, what? So if you go down here to the specialty metal rules, you've got DoD waives specialty metal restrictions, rule waives metal restrictions. Under important update on DHS's Appendix A of the Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards. Now, to my knowledge, I don't know of any terrorist device that silver is involved with. You can click on this DHS link on the Chemical Anti-Terrorism Standard, and you'll find that you go to a 404 page. Not found. So it's dragging here. We'll give it a second. You also have the final rules, the Appendix A. When you go into any of these Adobe documents, you can do a search for silver. And this one's just timing out, but it was giving me a 404 error, not found. So you can go to all these linked documents and you find all of these documents about the chemical facilities and the government's interest in these, and you see things like fertilizer and things that terrorists could use. It makes sense that the DHS would be interested in chemicals that terrorists could use to foment terrorist acts. And this document is just not loading. But when I did load the document, and this document, I'll put the links here for you to see. But when you search those PDFs, you don't find any mention of silver. So it's very curious why the SUA is interested in the DHS's Chemical Facility Anti-Terrorism Standards. I don't even have a clue what they're talking about. The next interesting thing here is the SUA's position on the silver ETF. And this is kind of interesting. Let's go to their policy position. And they give a history of the silver market, and that's very telling. But we'll get down to, because we don't have time, we'll get down to the SUA position. The Silver Users Association opposes the creation of a silver ETF because of the concerns that doing so will require the holding of physical silver be held in allocated accounts, thus removing large amounts of silver from the market. By doing so, the ETF will cause a shortage of silver in the marketplace. If this happens, it will ultimately be the economy that suffers due to negative impact, taking large amounts of silver out of the market, and this will have an effect on industry. So this is the clearest statement of the Silver Users Association. They are opposed to investors investing in silver. Now, you know my position on the ETF. I don't believe there is any silver in the ETF. So this is probably just some diversion, and it's interesting that you have this back and forth. Ted Butler has addressed this, but the main point here is that the Silver Users Association, basically they are a cartel of silver users who are interested in suppressing the price of silver because they use it in their manufacturing. Now, you would think that they would be somewhat reasonable and want the price to rise in a reasonable way for economic sake, that it's actually mined so they don't find themselves in a squeeze. But of course they don't. I don't have time to go into meetings and the list of members, etc. it's strange that when you look at the members, you find some of the manufacturers of bars and things like that. So the Silver Users Association is a very strange beast, and there's just no accounting for their positions. Ultimately, of course, as I put out in my blog today, markets are greater than any of the participants. They're greater than any government. So the Silver Users Association is just a cartel that is interested in suppressing the price of silver so that they can use up all the silver at a low price. Unfortunately for them, that's already occurred, and we're now in the middle of an explosive bull market for physical silver, and we're very close to a turning point, as I pointed out here, that we're about ready to explode to the upside. That's my opinion. Now, I want to show that when I go to the blog roll here, because I covered that in, I'm going to start from the bottom because I started out this morning with an article about it's called Too Big to Succeed. This article is about how the eye of the needle, that is the amount of silver that is available for investment, is so tiny, and the chain of camels that need to go through that eye is unbelievable. So I really encourage you to look at that story. You can see I listed the hedge fund, pension fund, and mutual fund assets. And to summarize, if you add them all together and take just 1% of that amount of money, you get $470 billion. That's enough money at $28 an ounce to buy 16 billion ounces of silver. That's 21 years of mined silver. So, and it's covered in my Office series. I encourage you to watch that. The point is that there is an eye of a needle and a camel needs to get through it. So the question is, why haven't the major players invested in the most highest percentage returning assets in the history of the last decade, yet they're not involved? And the reason is because they can't be, because the needle is tiny and they're a camel and they have to go through it. So let's do the blog roll. The top story is Dollar Vigilante, and he talks about the enslavement of the next generation, how if they have criminal records, they're not going to get out of the country. The next one is Endless Mountain. He's done an excellent technical analysis of silver, and I encourage you to watch that. There's Jim Sinclair, and he goes into shadow stats, statistics. There's Jesse's page, which is Le Café Américain, and he's saying that there is a bear raid going on right now. The Italian bonds that is covered on Harvey Organ. This is the first Harvey Organ I've covered, but he's very important because he breaks down all the numbers that are coming out of the COMEX. Bix Weir's latest, where he explains how it's very difficult to procure physical silver at a reasonable price. I covered the DHS and Viper teams and how they're breaking out to the malls. I have a video here of a recent riot that happened at one of the malls, and I quote some historical information, scriptures, and from John Adams about how if you don't have a moral, law-abiding people, you're probably going to have a police state. So that's very interesting. There's Gary North's perspective on unemployment and how the Keynesian theory of economics causes protracted and unsolvable unemployment. I encourage you to read that. There's King World News, where Eric King does an interview with John Embry, and he pretty much lays it on the line what's going on with silver. There is Gold Money's article about the Iranian gold. This is a picture that is, I believe, of Iranian gold. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. Bix Weir's previous one is about the Silver Slam, and it's a summary of 2011. And there's Max Kaiser, who's, of course, slamming the banks and the pinstripe bandits. This is an article I did this morning about Too Big to Succeed, and this summarizes, again, the point about how silver is such a tiny market. There's just so much money out there, and they can't get through this eye of the needle. There's just too much money and not enough silver. So Before we end, I wanted to take you over to APMEX, and everyone's looking for coins to buy. I went through and surfed through all the pages, and I did find something that I like. This is the 2012 Kookaburra, and they do have some left. You can see they have 1,206 left. Yes, the premium is very steep. We're looking at 34.11. I think we're bumping up on 28 on the silver price. We're very close. I think when we bounce, we're going to bounce hard. So I'm not recommending anything, but this is one of the best numismatic plays I'm seeing out there right now, this 2012 Kookaburra. I don't think it's the most beautiful numismatic coin, but then again, there's not a lot out there to pick from as far as the silver hedgers, the people that are hedging their book in the paper market to be able to sell you these physical coins at a low price. Now you have to remember that they're hedging in the COMEX, they're hedging in the LBMA, they're hedging their position so that they're able to sell you a coin for a price actually lower than what they paid. That's only because they are making a profit on their short positions. That will not continue unless the MF Global situation is resolved and the investors are made whole. So there's possibly coming a time when the physical silver sellers are just going to have to shut down their shops when the price drops below what they bought the coins for. You're still in a situation where you can buy the coins actually for less than what they purchased the coins from the mint from, and that's because they have hedged shorts on the paper markets. That's not going to last for long, and you need to get what you can now because there's coming a time when silver won't be available. And we'll talk to you next time.